consultations in the real world for about 10 years, and we've taken that giant leap into the virtual world to start working on video group clinics now. So I'm just going to let Anna introduce herself and then we'll move forward with the session.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, so I'm Anna from Redmore Health. I've been supporting ELC and Helen's team with the tech side of running video group clinics, so everything you need to know from a tech perspective. So ELC and Redmore, we've both been commissioned by NHS England and NHS Improvement to start running these training sessions for practice staff. So first we've done a Sentinel programme, and we are going to be going into a second phase of the Sentinel programme. So today's session is a briefing session. It's not a training session, but it's just to give you a brief overview of what video group clinics are and what you can do going forward. So I'm just going to go through today's flow and the session flow of what we'll be looking at today. The same way as I'm setting up this session now is how you would set up a video group clinic with your patients. So I'm going to mirror how you would set up a session with your patients, just so you can see how it would work for you. So the session flow today is welcome and introductions, which we've already done. If you have just joined us and you haven't already, please just introduce yourself in the chat bar. Just pop in your name, your practice name, and then your email address, just so we know who we've got with us today. We're then going to go through the video group clinic flow. So similar to how I'm going through the briefing session flow now, we're going to go through the flow of what a video group clinic looks like. We're then going to go through applications of video group clinics, so how they're being used in general practice. And Linda's going to come on and discuss her experiences with face-to-face and video group clinics. We're then going to give you the opportunity to have a bit of a Q&A at the end. So anything that's been asked in the chat bar or any other questions that you might have towards the end, feel free to just pop them in the chat bar or just come on and ask any questions. We're then going to go through next steps. So asking you what your next steps are going to be after this briefing session. We'll also give you the opportunity to feedback, and then we'll be finishing in an hour. Okay, so now I'm just going to go through the group understandings in the car park today. So like I said before, the way I'm setting up this briefing session is how you would set up a video group clinic with your patients. So you will go through the flow of the video group clinic and then go through the understandings and the car park. So looking at the first poster, group understandings, be in the room. So these are the understandings that we're going to follow today, hopefully. So please be in the room. As hard as it is in this virtual room, just switch your mobiles off and try to stay, curious as to what's happening. Respect different perspectives and listen to each other. Somebody might ask a question that you were going to ask and they might just get there first. So just make sure that you listen to each other's questions. They might actually ask a question that you hadn't thought of as well. Respect confidentiality. So we are recording this session just so other practices that haven't been able to attend can get a feel for what video group clinics are, but please don't record any parts of this session yourself. Mute your microphone and use the chat unless we ask you to unmute. So we're just staying muted, because if we don't stay muted, we pick up on each other's background noises and it causes a lot of feedback, so we can't actually hear what's being said. Spelling mistakes are welcome. So if you have any questions that you want to ask in the chat and you make a spelling mistake, don't worry about it. We might ask you to come on and just try and give an explanation of what you meant, but we can work around spelling mistakes. I often spell lots of things wrong, so please don't worry about that. If your technology isn't working, so you end up not being able to hear or see us, or the presentation keeps coming up and down, just leave and try and rejoin. It might rejig the system, or just leave and you will get, you can get a copy of the recording so you can see it at a later date. We are going to keep to time, and if you've got any other things that you think should be on that group understanding, can you just pop them into the chat? Okay, so now I'm going to just move on to the second poster, which is the car park. So in today's briefing session, we will use the car park for, if there are any questions that you ask that myself or Helen can't answer, we will car park it and find the answer to the question and get back to you at another time. you will also use the car park within your video group clinics with your patients. So if there's ever a question that gets asked during the video group clinic and you don't think you can answer it then and there, you can car park it and get back to your patients afterwards. So that car park really does become your best friend in a lot of ways, and it's a really good tool for you when you start running video group clinics with your patients. Okay, so I'm just going to pass over to Helen, who's going to take you through the rest of the session.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Okay, so what I'd like to do is take you through what a video group clinic looks like. And to start that off, I'm just going to introduce the 3 key roles that are involved. So really want to point out that these are roles, not necessarily separate people. So there could be some crossover, certainly between the facilitator and the clinic coordinator. So first of all, obviously, we have a clinician. This is probably somebody who is already in your practice doing one-to-one reviews for long-term conditions like diabetes, COPD, that sort of thing. So it might be a GP, it might be a practice nurse, might be an HCA, somebody who's already involved in the one-to-one reviews for long-term conditions. And then we have a technical facilitator. Please don't be put off by the word technical. We've added the word technical to this role because it's a clinic that's running on video. So there is a little bit of tech work, but it's not, it really doesn't need a techie expert. So this is somebody who can manage a group of people and can manage this process, can manage the timings and set the session up the way that Anna has just set the session up with you. So in a way today, although this isn't a clinical session, Anna is playing the role of the facilitator and I'm playing the role of the clinicians, just so you can see how that would play out. And then the clinic coordinator, again, is probably somebody already doing this work in your practice to recall your patients for their one-to-one appointments. So this is not new work, it's different work. It's a different way of working. I just don't want you to think this is lots of extra new work that you've suddenly got to find people to do. So those are the 3 key roles that are involved, and we go into those in more detail in the training. Anna, could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So I just want to give you an overview about consent and confidentiality. So we go into this in much more detail in the training. We've got a really robust process agreed. Video group clinics are covered by NHS resolutions. You would just need to check your own practice insurance to check for data and cyber insurance and whether you need to get a top up. The whole process that you go through with patients includes a confirmation of their ID and their location so that you know you've got the right patients on the call and you know where they are if you needed to urgently get some help for them. The consent process is split into a 3-part process. So this splits into pre-consent, and this is where the patients are given some information beforehand and they understand that by clicking the link that they click to join, that they are consenting to a certain amount of information about sharing of their results and confidentiality. The actual consent process happens within the video group clinic at the very beginning. And as I said, we go through this in detail in the training. And then you record, that's the 3rd part, you record the consent that the patient has given on their medical record after the clinic has finished. We give you information to share with patients about confidentiality and privacy so that patients are aware that the expectation is that there's no sharing of any information that they hear on the call and that there's no recording as well. And also there's some information about privacy settings. So patients really need to understand that the privacy settings on their own devices are their own responsibility. It's not your responsibility as a practice. So some personal information is always stored on a device when accessing something like a video group clinic, and patients are responsible for that themselves. You're just highlighting that to them. So as I said, we go into this in much more detail. I just wanted to give you an overview so that you know that this is all covered and that we've got this very robust process in place. So let me take you through what a video group clinic looks like. So this looks very similar to the poster that Anna went through with you at the beginning. That was the session flow for this briefing. This is your session flow for a video group clinic. So it starts off with welcome and introductions. So during that, your facilitator will carry out the consent and confidentiality process, and patients will consent in the chat column. Your facilitator will introduce the posters, so set up with the group understandings, introduce the concept of the car park, and share the session flow so that patients know what's going to happen, and you're contracting with them really with the group understandings. You're saying this is how we're going to work together. It gives you something to go back to if you need something to pull you back on track later on in the session. Then the facilitator introduces the results board. And this is the really focus point of your video group clinic. So this is an example results board for a diabetes group clinic. So you'll see that the patient's names are down the left hand side, and then results, the titles of the results are across the top. So some of those are biometrics, some of them are other checks that you would do for this type of review. So straight away patients will look to see their own results. They won't necessarily understand all of them, and then they will start to compare, because that is human nature. That's what we do. So they'll start to look at those results and think, oh, look where my results are compared to somebody else's. So for example, Annette might think, why is my cholesterol so much higher than everybody else's? And she might want to know why Norman's is so low. So this really starts to trigger questions for patients. So the patients type their questions into the chat column. Every question that they can think of that will help them to understand their condition. Clinicians tell us that quite often the first question they get asked on a diabetes review is, what does HbA1c mean? And the clinician thinks, hang on a minute, I've been talking about this for 5 years with you. How did you not know? So it becomes really clear that actually patients have not got the clear understanding about their condition and things that influence it that we think they might have. So the patients look at the results board. The facilitator supports them to really dig deep and ask all of their questions. And what will happen is that there will be some repetition. I'm sure that you are used to spending several days a week, perhaps, repeating the same information over and over again in one-to-one appointments. So your patients will have a lot of the same questions. What will also happen is that a patient will ask a question and another patient thinks, that's a good question, I didn't think of that, but then it might trigger another question then as well. So the patients are really building on each other's questions and asking everything they can think of about their condition to help them understand it. Anna, could we go back please to the session flow? Thank you. So once the patients have decided on all of their questions, the clinician then joins the session. So the clinician is only joining for the middle part, for the clinical part of the session. So the clinician then answers all of the questions that have come up in the chat column, making sure that each one of them is addressed, checking in maybe with the patient if the clinician needs a bit of clarity about what the question is about, perhaps asking a patient to unmute and clarify something if that's needed. When all of those questions have been answered that are in the chat column, the clinician then goes to each patient individually. So this is the one-to-one element of the group clinic. The clinician checks in with each patient. Have you got any more questions? Is everything clear? Might do a medication review. So one by one, the clinician is checking in with each patient, and all of the other patients can hear this happening as well, but it's a specific one-to-one with that particular patient. And then the clinician leaves the session. the facilitator carries on working with that group of patients to help them really review their learning, make sure they've understood everything, and help them to set some personal actions and goals that are really going to have an impact on their condition. So it might be that because of what they've learned, one patient decides to make a particular change to their diet, or another patient might say they're going to go for a 20-minute walk every day if they've previously been quite inactive. So something that they can do and that they know is going to make a difference and have an impact on their condition. So they're really proactive in their self-care of their condition. And then that's the end of the session. All the facilitator needs to do is agree with them when they'll be back. So if it's a 12-month review, obviously they'll be saying, we'll see you again in 12 months, we'll call you back. Some practices are telling us that they're using this way of working to do some more kind of early intervention work, so perhaps some work with pre-diabetes patients, so they might be calling them back more regularly because that's what's needed for that particular topic. So you'll decide what's right for the topic that you're delivering. You just agree with the patients at the end when they'll be back, and that is the end of the session. That's how a session will flow. I'm going to just take you through a bit of detail about a GP that we've been working with in Berkshire now. Anna, could we have the next slide, please? Because I just want to make this look a bit more real for you so you can see what's been happening in another practice. So we've been working with a GP in Berkshire who had been working with face-to-face group consultations for about 18 months. And she had been working on topics including diabetes, pediatric asthma, chronic pain, and she included fibromyalgia in there. And they had seen really good results with this, including a reduction in A&E attendances, and also a reduction in appointments within their own practice. So some of their kind of repeat attenders were coming less. They were not taking up as many one-to-one appointments. So they worked together as a team to really make this really successful, and they'd worked with their social prescriber as well, and had involved a health coach. This GP really stressed that involving the admin team was really key, because it kind of takes a whole team approach to really make this change in work, in the way of working, really successful. And the admin team really felt like they were playing a really proactive part in transforming patient care because they were so involved in it. So they've been working this way for about 18 months, and then kind of around March time we enter into our COVID period. So obviously working with face-to-face group consultations was not possible. So this GP thought, well, I can't just stop seeing my patients. I need to find another way of consulting with them. So they decided to start looking at video group clinics. So they decided they would start with asthma first, and they looked at their shielding patients. And then they drilled that down a bit more and looked at patients who were on steroids, who'd had hospital admittances, and who were on 3 or more treatments for their asthma. So they ran their first clinic, and it was really successful. They looked at care plans. They looked at peak flow meters, who'd got peak flow meters, did they know how to use them properly? They looked at inhaler techniques. And then they looked at the difference between typical asthma symptoms and COVID symptoms, so that patients' awareness was really raised about when to be concerned. And then they talked about how to protect themselves as well, so that they were really in the best place to stay well. They looked at diet and lifestyle, breathing techniques, general well-being, and other services that were available in the community as well. So after that first one, they started holding weekly clinics, involving the team to think about which topics to include and which patients to invite. So they've looked at areas different areas to do this, and they've focused as well on anxiety, general anxiety. So a lot of patients have lost a lot of their support networks over the last few months, and they invited some of those patients to attend clinics, people who they might have perhaps been seeing a lot before and who now they knew were not able to access any support at all. And if they felt that patients were unsure about attending, they spoke to them individually and encouraged them to attend. One specific area that they looked at was in response to something that was happening locally. So they had an increase in safeguarding incidents, in particular non-accidental injuries for babies. So they had 4 shaken babies, and then this rose to 7 cases, which resulted in 1 death, sadly, and another baby in ITU. And this GP really stressed that these were families where there was no previous concerns. There were no mental health issues, and the parents were fit and well. So this GP worked with the safeguarding team and the health visiting team to put on a video group clinic, and she worked across her PCN. So 5 practices were involved, and they invited families with babies under 12 weeks old across the PCN area. 26 families attended. So it was run jointly with the health visitor. The health visitor showed a video of a baby crying because they wanted to really pick up on the fact that there was this rise in safeguarding incidents. So they showed the video of the baby crying, and one of the parents trying to think of everything to soothe the baby, you know, changing the nappy, trying another bottle, everything that you can think of. And the overriding message that the health visitor wanted to get over was sometimes it's okay to put your baby down and just walk away for a breather. So they got really good feedback from running the clinic in this way, and the parents of the babies really appreciated being able to access some support at such an important time in their baby's life. They've been asked to, moving forward, to look at the next age range as well at 3 to 6 months. So Anna, could I just have the next slide, please? So this is how they're kind of moving forward with this now. So they're carrying on running video group clinics, and they see it now as not just a COVID response, actually it's embedded in the way they're going to work moving forward. So they'll carry on working with diabetes. They're looking at general health, anxiety and well-being. As I said before, they've been asked to look at the 3 to 6 month age range of babies, and that's across their PCN still. General kind of healthy eating and lifestyle, and also menopause, and they're thinking all the time of new topics to cover based on the needs of their patient population. So hopefully that's given you a kind of feel for how that might look for you, and started you thinking about how you might be able to work in this way. Anna, I'm just going to check in if there's been any questions as we've gone along.
There's just been one from Lauren. Do you have any idea how long the process takes for the clinician to answer all the questions, do the one-to-one reviews, then spend time documenting afterwards?
Okay, so the whole clinic, we would say that a group clinic is probably 90 minutes, and the clinician is there for 45 minutes to an hour in the middle of that. So we would recommend 6 to 8 patients. And maybe at the beginning, when you're first starting out, maybe aim for 6, and then if you think that you can manage more, perhaps up it to 8. And your one-to-one bit, some patients will just say, yeah, thanks, you've answered everything, that's fine. Generally about 5 minutes per patient, but some will take less than that. That's why we say it's that clinical bit is about 45 minutes to an hour. And all of the feedback that we're getting is that is working well, that time frame is working well. Lauren, I hope that answers your question. Oh, and the documenting afterwards. So there is documentation to do afterwards, but you would be doing that anyway as part of a one-to-one. So that we give you after the training, you get a resource pack with templates in for a lot of what you need for running a clinic. In terms of documentation, practices are doing that in different ways. There's codes for EMIS and System 1, so you can log that you've run a patient has attended a group clinic. And then what a lot of practices do is that they will make perhaps a Word document that sums up everything that has been discussed that everybody has heard, and that can just get added to each patient, and then you'll add anything specific that's individual to one patient to their own record. Lauren, if there's any more questions about that, just please pop them into the chat. Is there anything else, Anna, or was that all?
No, that was all.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Linda, who's going to, I forgot this slide. There's a bit of patient feedback here about video group clinics. So it just really gives you a flavour of what patients are saying. This is the GP in Berkshire. This is what some of her patients were saying about the video group clinics that they had attended. You can see that they really value them. This is a real kind of grassroots up approach to consulting. Patients have really pushed this forward and really report how valuable they find it, how they really value meeting other patients, other people who are in the same boat as them, who are living with the same condition, so we can know as much as we know about a condition, but we're not necessarily actually living with it day to day. So the value for a patient to meet somebody else who is also living with the same condition is really immeasurable. Okay, Linda, are you there?
I'm here, Helen.
Hello, Linda. So I'm going to hand over to Linda so she can share some of her experiences with you.
Thanks very much. So hi, everybody. Great to know that we've got people from across North East London joined us here today. So thank you very much for coming, everybody. I'm Linda Aldous. I'm Director of Nursing at Bromley by Bow Health, and we have 3 practices. My experience of group consultations so far has been face-to-face. So I'm on this journey with you in terms of virtual group clinics, but we've been running face-to-face group consultations pre-COVID for about 18 months. And I cannot tell you how enthusiastic and how joyful these consultations can be. Very much echoing the slide that Helen has just shown, it's the patient experience and the joy that patients feel having met up with others, learned from each other, being able to share their own stories. As it's just a tremendous feeling, and I'm absolutely convinced that people get so much more out of this form of consultation rather than the one-to-ones. And in terms of staff satisfaction, there are many of you listening today that will have sat in your consultation room doing a face-to-face on a one-to-one basis and repeating yourself over and over again. Helen alluded to this earlier on. To be able to have a group situation where you're explaining things just once, and that often it's about diet, often it's about, you know, healthy lifestyles in terms of exercise, or you know, if you're talking about asthma, in terms of how to use your peak flow meter and how to use your inhaler properly. So I think the time saved and the improvement in the way that we can deliver just one message for everybody rather than that repetition, it really makes a difference in terms of staff fulfillment, I think. Just on the clinical side, we have in Tower Hamlets, our practices are in Tower Hamlets, we have always had excellent diabetes control. Very good results for diabetes. My experience in group consultations has been in diabetes. In pre-COVID, we were looking at moving into other care areas. But in terms of diabetes, we had in Tower Hamlets for a very long time the best blood pressure control and the best cholesterol control. But HbA1c's best diabetic control was eluding us slightly. I can honestly say that our levels of HbA1c dropped through using group consultations. It's just a sort of minor study that I did on the patients that have gone through our process, but actually the vast majority of them had reduced HbA1c at 6 months and 12 months following our interventions. Now, it's not a scientific study, I appreciate that, but I'm very, very pleased with early results, and I'm sure Helen's organisation has more evidence about the benefits, the clinical benefits to patients. One of the things that I think is really, really interesting, and again, Helen alluded to this, is that when people are in a group, they start to disclose things that they may not do in front of a clinician. So the conversation tends to flow. It tends to flow around the results board, comparing results, and people are finding out about each other's stories. But I've had people sit and disclose things that they would never have done if we were in a one-to-one situation. People tend to feel much more comfortable in a peer group. So never underestimate the power of this. As I say, I think I'm on this journey with you, and I'm sure we'll all learn together. I'm actually leading the project for virtual group consultations across Northeast London. So I hope to be able to be in conversation with many more of you. Would very much encourage everybody to join up for the training. So I'm very happy to answer questions if people want to post any, and I'll hand on to Anna, because I'm hoping she will be able to help me pick those questions up if there are any directed at me, or when we come into the question and answer session. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Linda. Anna, do you want to facilitate our Q&A?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going on to the next slide. There
Thanks.
we go. Okay, all right, so now we're going on to a Q&A session. So it's just really an opportunity for you to ask any questions in the chat bar, but also you can welcome to come off mute and ask any questions verbally as well. I think we have had a couple of questions already, so we'll just get on with answering the ones that are already there whilst you're typing out your questions. So Catherine has asked, how do patients react to seeing their results available for others in the group to read?
Okay, so we're much more bothered about this than the patients are. I'm going to actually see if Linda wants to answer that, because you've run groups and seen the patients with the results board, haven't you, Linda?
Yes, thanks. So I was quite nervous about sharing results before we learned from ELC about this methodology. I had run diabetes groups prior to running the groups the way we are now, and I'd been very, very nervous about sharing results between people and thinking that we had to keep everything confidential. I'll reiterate that I think this is very, very powerful. I think it really works well. People don't mind sharing their results, and of course remember that you have consented them. You've explained that their results will be shared already. Actually, it's a real conversation starter, and as Helen had said, people like to compare themselves with each other and learn why why their result might not be as another person's is. And of course, you can go into explanations. There might be a whole host of reasons why their result is different from anybody else's. But I think it's a great conversation starter, and people actually really enjoy comparing.
Great, thank you, Linda. Okay, so there's just been another question. Tori has asked, is there issues with patients using IT? Wonder if this may be an issue with the language barriers working in Tower Hamlets. So, I mean, I can answer this with the IT side of stuff. So, We are developing some one-siders on the main video solutions so that you can give them out to your patients, and they have demo videos of how you can access how they can access a video consultation on that platform. It would be the responsibility of the tech facilitator as well to get that information to them on, if you're using a different type of platform for them to run the video group clinic. It is the responsibility of them to show them, not show them, but give them a bit of a, some bullet points on this is how you'd get into it. But usually it is just clicking a link. It's something very simple like that and opening up in a browser. So it's not usually, lots of different things that they're having to download or onto the laptops and stuff. Obviously, yes, this sometimes tends to be, an issue with patients trying to get on, but as long as you're really clear with them on how they access it, that's really helpful. I think as well, we always say this, but at the moment, especially with everything that's gone on in the current climate, we always get asked about older patients and them accessing tech and not knowing how to use it. But you will actually see that a lot of your patients from the older generation will have been passed down different types of technology so that they could contact their, loved ones and family members during COVID. So they're used to doing that type of video consultation. So it is just really explaining to them how they would get onto the call. But once they're on the call, the tech facilitator is on hand to help them with the tech aspect of stuff. And it's not really a difficult way of joining a call either. It's a very, simple, just clicking on a link and typing in your name kind of situation. It's not having to download things and open up different accounts and different things like that. So it's usually very simple.
Okay, thanks, Anna. I'll pick up just on the language side of things. So we do look at this in the training, but there's some things that you can think about in terms of using the resource available to you. So it may be appropriate to have an interpreter, and that may be something you arrange, or it may be perhaps a family member or a friend who can attend with a patient, who will also go through that consent and confidentiality process in the same way as the patient does. But actually, if it's a language that is common in your area, maybe there's somebody in your practice team who also speaks that same language. So it may be that you run the whole clinic in that language. So we know, for example, that there are diabetes reviews running in Haringey in Turkish. So use the resource that's available to you within your team as well. Or it may be that you can bring a particular group of patients together who speak a common language, and the person who needs the translator is actually the clinician. So real kind of shift in the power balance there, really, if we're looking at it in a different way. So I think that there's different ways of looking at it, and there's ways that you can really make this happen. It's a really good way of engaging with different communities within your area. Linda, have you got anything to add to that? Is there anything that you've particularly done with your face-to-face sessions?
We're quite fortunate in Tower Hamlets to have advocates and interpreters available to us. So we've run group sessions with an interpreter facilitating, and it works incredibly well. Yes, sometimes the clinician is the person that's kind of left behind some of the conversations, to be honest. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. All right. Okay. So we've had another question from Julie. While anonymous, there has to be consent, and how is this obtained prior to the meetings?
Okay, so Julie, we go through this in detail in the training, but it is a 3-part process. So it's pre-consent, so patients know beforehand that information is going to be shared and that confidentiality is key. And then the actual consent happens right at the very beginning of your clinic. And if the patient chooses to not consent, if they won't agree to the patient agreement that's been sent beforehand, and they choose not to consent, then they have to leave the clinic. So you don't proceed until you've got consent. from patients, or a patient has left, and then that patient's results are removed from the results board before it's shared. Does that answer your question? If you just pop in the chat column either a yes, or if there's something else, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so we've had a couple more questions from Tori. With group consultations, family and children, should they be smaller groups?
That's a really good question, Tori, and I'll share my experience with you. So my background's in Sure Start Children's Centres, where we introduced face-to-face group consultations for the 2-year development check, and we were part of a pilot for that, working with our health visiting team, and we found that the maximum number for us was 6. So if you take into account that that might be possibly with 2 parents and the child, that was definitely enough. And we learned very quickly also to set expectations early on about how many people could attend. That was after somebody had turned up with 5 adults with 1 child, and it was a bit busy. So we kind of set our ground rules, if you like, in our invitation letter about how many people could attend with each child. So I think you'll work that out for yourself depending on your topic and the age of the child. But for us, 6 2-year-olds was really about the right number, and any more would have made it less manageable.
Okay, thank you. And then we had another question that was kind of related to that. So, do you think it would be possible to do group consultations in school? I normally do teaching of 20 to 40 pupils, but I don't think this is going to be happening basically due to COVID. So, wondering if you could do it virtually.
Definitely, you. I think it could work in schools. I think. Not for 20 to 40 pupils though, probably. I think there's a distinction, I think, between what we would call group education. So if it's a teaching thing where you've got a curriculum or a lesson plan or something like that, that's group education and is a bit different to what we're talking about here, because this is real kind of patient-led, person-led consulting, so that they are shaping the agenda rather than us going into a session knowing what we want to deliver. So that's a kind of 2-part answer to your question. Yes, definitely, I think it could work in schools, but this is a different way of working than actually online teaching. I don't know if I've answered your question fully there, Tori. If you want to unmute and top up your question at all, please do. Or add to the chat column. But I think, yes, in theory, yes, it could work in schools.
That's okay, fine. Thanks, you answered Tori. It. Great. Yeah. All right. Okay, so we haven't had many more questions, and I think everyone's had enough time to ask. I'm just going to give you another 30 seconds to if you've got any more questions, and then we'll move on. Oh, yeah, we've had another one. Okay. Sometimes the people asking questions help you think of some more questions as well, which is good. So that's why it's good to listen to each other, like we say in the understandings. Okay, so Catherine's asked, how do you stop patients from recording the session, or are you happy for them to do so? So that's the first part of the question.
Okay, so I'm going to say this line again. We go into this in more detail in the training. This is covered in the consent and confidentiality part of the session. So your facilitator goes through a very clear process with patients. We give you the slides that you will use with your patients to go through this, and the facilitator is very clear. There is no recording of this session. So that includes the practice isn't recording it, and that patients are not recording it or taking any photos or recording any sound. And that's what they're consenting to. That's what they're agreeing to as part of this whole process. So yeah. Obviously you're not physically in the same room as them, so you're not able, you're not able to physically stop them, but there are absolutely no reports of any confidentiality breaches in face-to-face consultations or video group clinics. So interestingly, we ran a session a few weeks ago where a patient spoke for about 10 minutes about her experience of a video group clinic, and somebody asked a similar kind of question, and her response was very much, don't insult us. If we've agreed that we're not going to record, then we're not going to. If we've agreed that we're not going to breach confidentiality, trust us. Go through this process properly, go through the consent and confidentiality process properly, clearly, so that you're obtaining informed consent from your patients, and you have followed due process so that you're covered in that area.
Okay, thank you. And then the second part to that question is also, how do you know if participants know each other? They might recognise each other, and then they'll know the name that's on the results board.
Sure. Okay. So your patients will sign in just using their first name, possibly the first initial of their surname, and I guess there's a chance they may know each other. If you know that information beforehand, then you can avoid inviting them to the same one. A patient can choose to leave if they suddenly realise that they know somebody who's on there. Patients have got a choice about this. So if they do discover that they know somebody, they can make an active choice to leave, or they can choose to stay. So I would say if you've got that information and you think it's not a good idea to bring them together. So I'll give you an example. In my experience, we were due to invite 2 particular families for their 2-year development checks, and we knew that these 2 children had the same father and different mothers. So we decided not to invite them to the same review because it was not a very friendly relationship. So we were kind to ourselves and decided to invite them to different ones. So I think that's what you will work with, really. I mean, that could happen face to face as well. Linda, have you got anything to add to that?
Yes, just to present the flip side to the scenario that you've presented, actually, and obviously the concern in Catherine's question is that actually it can be really beneficial. We're talking about people who live next door to each other anyway, in a practice community, in a practice population in the same area, and actually a lot of our work at Bromley by Bow is about bringing communities together, and I've got lots of examples of where we've run face-to-face groups and old friends reunite, people make new friends, and those relationships carry on. And actually, isn't that what we want to actually promote, is people helping each other out and becoming friends and rejoining their community? So it can be very powerful from the other side as well, appreciating that it doesn't always work well.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. All right, so we haven't had any more questions, so I'm just going to move on now because I'm conscious of time. But if you do have any more questions, just pop them in the chat and we will get them answered. Okay, so I'd just like you to pop into the chat. What are your next steps after doing this briefing session? So is it that you're going to register your interest in training? Is it that you're going to go back to your colleagues and speak a little bit about with them what you've learnt today? Or is it that you just want to start getting trained as soon as possible so you can run these with your patients? If you just like to pop that in the chat bar and we can have a look at what your thoughts are. To register your interest for the training, you need to email info@ELC-Works, which you can just see on your screens at the minute, and then just put the area that you're in, so North East London, the name of your practice, a lead contact at your practice, and then the number and their email as well. You only need to register once for the practice. You don't need a few of you from the practice to register. It just needs one person. Okay. So it looks like you'd like to register for the training, you're interested, you'd like to register. Becca said, thank you, so inspiring. I'm going to feed back to my practice. Thank you, Rebecca. Talk to colleagues. Brilliant. Lorraine wants to start the training already. She's already registered for the training, so that's great. Scheduled for Sentinel training tomorrow. Great, Nick. I'm running the session tomorrow, so I'll see you tomorrow. All very enthusiastic. Brilliant. All right. It looks like the briefing's done its job then. It looks like we've got a lot of interest going. Okay, I'm just going to pass over to Helen now, who's just going to close the session.
Okay, thanks, Anna. So it's great to see that you're all really keen to move forward. I will send you a follow-on email with the details again on how to register your interest if you're interested in training. So we will keep a register of interest and then get back in contact with you after we've talked in your area about next steps. So thank you for your time and attention today. It's really good to see that we've hopefully generated lots of interest. It would be really helpful for us if you could just give us a little bit of feedback. So if you could just post into the chat column, please, some things that have worked well for you today. So preface your comments with WW for worked well, and anything you think we could have improved today. So an I for improvement. So WW for what's worked well for you today, and I for improve. That would be really helpful. Thank you. And then as you're doing that, I'm just going to say thank you and goodbye, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much, everybody.